The morning sun casts long shadows across the Caribbean waters as you stand on the deck of a merchant vessel, watching the horizon with growing unease. You are Sarah, the daughter of a prosperous tobacco merchant, traveling from Port Royal to Charleston with a cargo hold full of valuable goods. The gentle rocking of the ship has been your companion for days, but today something feels different. A horizon, growing black speck appears on the distant larger with each passing moment. Your heart begins to race as you recognize the distinctive silhouette approaching your vessel. This is no ordinary ship cutting through the waves towards you. The Jolly Roger snaps violently in the ocean breeze, its skull and crossbones a herald of the nightmare about to unfold. Within hours, your comfortable world will be shattered beyond recognition. The pirates who are about to board your ship don't just want your father's cargo or the silver coins hidden in the captain's quarters. They want something far more valuable and infinitely more terrible. They want you. What you're about to discover is that the romanticized tales of swashbuckling pirates and their adventures on the high seas have obscured one of history's most systematic and horrifying forms of exploitation. The golden age of piracy, spanning roughly from the 1650s to the 1730s, was built upon a foundation of violence that extended far beyond mere theft and murder. For countless women who found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, capture by pirates meant something worse than death itself. This isn't the sanitized version of piracy you've seen in Hollywood films or read about in adventure novels. This is the unvarnished truth about what happened to women when pirates struck, documented in court records, survivor testimonies, and the chilling accounts of those who witnessed these atrocities firsthand. The evidence is overwhelming, disturbing, and largely forgotten by popular culture. Before we dive deeper into this dark chapter of maritime history, take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you're interested in exploring the hidden truths behind historical events. We're committed to presenting history as it actually happened, not as we wish it had been. The pirate ships that terrorized the Caribbean and Atlantic trade routes were floating prisons designed for maximum efficiency in both combat and exploitation. These vessels, often converted merchant ships or captured naval frigates, became mobile headquarters for criminal enterprises that operated far beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement. The crews that manned these ships weren't the jolly bands of misfits portrayed in popular fiction. They were hardened criminals who had abandoned all pretense of civilized behavior. When pirates targeted a merchant vessel, they employed tactics that were both psychologically devastating and brutally effective. The initial assault was designed to break the will of their victims before resistance could even be mounted. Pirates would often approach under false colors, flying the flags of friendly nations until they were close enough to reveal their true intentions. The moment of realization, when passengers and crew understood what was about to happen, was carefully orchestrated to maximize terror and confusion. The boarding process itself was a masterclass in organized violence. Pirates would swarm onto the captured vessel with weapons drawn, immediately separating passengers by gender and perceived value. Male crew members faced summary execution if they showed any sign of resistance, while male passengers might be spared if they possessed useful skills or could pay substantial ransoms. But for women aboard these vessels, the calculation was entirely different and infinitely more sinister. Women represented a unique form of valuable cargo to pirate crews. Unlike gold or silver, which could be spent and forgotten, women provided ongoing utility that made them extraordinarily precious in the twisted economy of piracy. The initial capture was merely the beginning of an ordeal that could last months or even years, depending on circumstances that were entirely beyond the victim's control. The sorting process that took place on the deck of a captured ship was conducted with the cold efficiency of a livestock auction. Pirates evaluated their female captives based on age, apparent social status, physical appearance, and perceived usefulness. Older women, or those deemed less attractive, might be killed immediately or abandoned on deserted islands. Young women of obvious breeding and beauty faced a different fate entirely. one that their captors viewed as far more profitable. The living conditions aboard pirate vessels were deliberately designed to break the spirit of captives while preserving their physical value. Women were typically confined in the ship's hold, often in improvised cages or simply chained to the hull. The space was cramped, poorly ventilated, and reeking of human waste and seawater. Food was scarce and of poor quality, consisting mainly of hardtack, salted meat that was often spoiled, and brackish water that frequently carried disease. The psychological warfare employed by pirates was perhaps even more devastating than the physical conditions. Captive women were forced to listen to the screams of other prisoners being tortured, the drunken revelries of their captors, and the constant threat of violence that permeated every moment of their existence. Sleep became nearly impossible, not just due to the physical discomfort, but because of the ever-present fear of what might happen when the pirates decided to visit the hold. The hierarchical structure of pirate crews created a complex web of exploitation that affected how captive women were treated. The captain typically had first claim on any female prisoners, followed by the quartermaster and other senior officers. This pecking order meant that a woman might face multiple assaults in a single day, passed between different crew members according to their rank and standing within the pirate hierarchy. Pirates developed sophisticated systems for managing their human cargo during long voyages. Women who showed signs of compliance might be allowed slightly better treatment, perhaps being brought on deck for brief periods or given marginally better food. This wasn't mercy, but rather a calculated strategy to maintain the physical condition of valuable property. Those who resisted faced increasingly severe punishments designed to serve as examples to other captives. The economic value of captured women extended far beyond the immediate gratification of the crew. Pirates operated within extensive networks of criminal enterprises that included slave traders, officials, and corrupt colonial, scrupulous merchants. These networks created markets for human trafficking that spanned the entire Atlantic world, from the Caribbean islands to the ports of North Africa and beyond. The transportation of captive women between different pirate vessels or to land-based markets involved its own set of horrors. Women might be traded between crews like any other commodity, with no regard for the relationships or bonds they had formed with fellow captives. These transfers often took place in remote coves or hidden anchorages, away in. The documentation authorities who might intervene from the eyes of legitimate of these crimes comes from multiple sources that paint a consistent and disturbing picture. Colonial court records contain testimony from survivors who managed to escape or be rescued. Naval officers who captured pirate vessels often recorded detailed inventories of their human cargo. Even some pirates themselves left accounts of their activities, either in journals or in confessions made before their executions. The scope of this criminal enterprise was staggering in its scale and geographical reach. Major pirate strongholds like Nassau in the Bahamas, Tortuga off the coast of Haiti, and various hidden bases along the American coast all served as hubs for the trafficking of captive women. These locations provided the infrastructure necessary to support long-term captivity and the eventual disposal of human cargo through various criminal channels. The most successful pirate captains understood that their reputation for brutality toward women served as a powerful psychological weapon. Word of their particular cruelties would spread throughout the maritime community, often causing crews and passengers to surrender without resistance, rather than face the known consequences of defiance. This reputation management was a deliberate strategy that made future captures easier and more profitable. As we delve deeper into this dark history, it becomes clear that the treatment of captive women by pirates represented one of the most systematic forms of gender-based violence in the early modern period. The evidence reveals practices so disturbing that they challenge our fundamental understanding of human cruelty and the lengths to which people will go in pursuit of profit and power. The degradation of captive women began the moment pirates identified them as potential prizes. These criminals had developed a systematic approach to evaluating reduced women to mere commodities, innating their human cargo that a marketplace of suffering. The process was cold, calculating, and designed to extract maximum value from each victim while simultaneously breaking their will to resist. Pirates categorized their female captives into distinct groups based on perceived utility and profitability. The highest value was placed on young women of obvious genteel breeding, particularly those whose clothing and demeanor suggested wealthy families capable of paying substantial ransoms. These women represented the greatest potential return on investment, not just as immediate sources of income, but as long-term assets whose value could be realized through multiple channels. The second tier consisted of women who showed practical skills valuable to pirate operations. Those who could read and write were particularly prized, as literacy was a rare commodity that could be exploited for forging documents, maintaining ship records, or communicating with potential buyers in various ports. Women with medical knowledge, cooking abilities, or seamstress skills found themselves facing a different kind of hell, one where their competence became their curse. The lowest category included women deemed suitable only for the most basic forms of exploitation. These victims faced immediate and ongoing brutalization, with no pretense of preserving their condition for future sale. Their treatment served as both entertainment for the crew and a warning to other captives about the consequences of resistance or perceived uselessness. The daily routine aboard pirate vessels created a nightmare of structured terror for captive women. Each dawn brought fresh uncertainty about who would be selected for abuse, who might be killed for the amusement of drunken sailors, or who would simply disappear overboard during the night. The psychological torture of this constant uncertainty was as devastating as any physical violence, creating a state of perpetual terror that made resistance seem futile. Pirates employed sophisticated techniques to maintain control over their captives while preserving their market value. Women were often kept in competition with each other, with slightly better treatment given to those who complied most readily with their captors' demands. This system created internal hierarchies among the victims that prevented unified resistance while maximizing the psychological damage inflicted on each individual. The feeding schedule for captive women was deliberately irregular and insufficient, designed to weaken them physically while maintaining their basic survival. Pirates understood that starving women were easier to control, but they also recognized that dead women had no market value. This balance between control and preservation created a carefully calibrated system of deprivation that kept victims in a constant state of desperate vulnerability. The medical care provided to captive women was minimal and focused solely on maintaining their commercial viability. Pirates might treat threatened to injuries or illnesses that reduce a woman's sale price, but they showed no concern for pain, suffering, or long-term health consequences. Women who became pregnant faced particularly horrific treatment, as their condition complicated sale negotiations and reduced their immediate utility to the crew. The communication between different pirate vessels created an information network that tracked valuable captives across vast distances. News of particularly valuable women would spread through the pirate community, leading to negotiations, trades, and sales that treated human beings as simple cargo to be transferred between ships. This network ensured that no captive woman could ever feel safe, knowing that her fate might change at any moment based on the business decisions of criminals she had never met. The preparation of women for sale in various markets involved systematic efforts to disguise the evidence of their captivity and abuse. Pirates understood that buyers preferred merchandise that appeared relatively undamaged, so they developed techniques for temporarily improving the appearance of their captives before transactions. This cruel theatre of false recovery gave victims brief moments of hope that were inevitably crushed when they realized the purpose of their improved treatment. The auction process itself represented the ultimate dehumanization of captive women. They were displayed like livestock, examined by potential buyers who showed no more consideration for their humanity than they would for a horse or cow. The bidding process reduced each woman to a simple calculation of utility and desire, with her future determined by whoever could offer the highest price for her suffering. The buyers who participated in these human markets represented every level of colonial society, from wealthy plantation owners seeking domestic servants to brothel operators looking for new inventory. The diversity of purchasers revealed how deeply embedded this criminal enterprise was within the legitimate economy of the Atlantic world. Respectable merchants, government officials, and religious leaders all participated in transactions that they knew involved the sale of kidnapped women. The transportation of sold women to their final destinations involved another layer of horror as they were moved from the relative familiarity of their pirate captors to unknown buyers with unpredictable intentions. This final transfer often represented the moment when any remaining hope of rescue or escape was definitively crushed, as women found themselves in environments where even their former captors could no longer reach them. The legal framework of colonial society provided virtually no protection for women who had been trafficked by pirates. The combination of their uncertain legal status, the remote locations where they were held, and the corruption of local officials created an environment where these crimes could flourish with impunity. Even when authorities were aware of trafficking activities, the profits involved often ensured their silence or active participation. The long-term consequences for women who survived their ordeals extended far beyond their immediate captivity. Those who were eventually freed or escaped carried physical and psychological scars that affected every aspect of their remaining lives. Many found themselves unable to return to their previous existence, either because their families had been destroyed or because society refused to accept them after their experiences. The ripple effects of pirate trafficking extended throughout colonial communities as families searched desperately for missing relatives, and entire regions lived in fear of the next raid. The psychological impact on coastal populations was profound, with many communities abandoning traditional trade routes or implementing expensive security measures that disrupted normal commercial activity. The evolution of pirate trafficking techniques over time revealed an increasingly sophisticated understanding of human psychology and market economics. Later generations of pirates refined their methods based on lessons learned from earlier operations, creating ever more efficient systems for capturing, controlling, and disposing of human cargo. The international nature of the pirate economy meant that captive women might find themselves transported across vast distances to markets in completely different cultural contexts. A woman captured off the coast of Carolina might eventually find herself sold in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, or even the Indian Ocean, facing not only continued captivity, but complete cultural displacement. The corruption of colonial officials who facilitated or ignored pirate trafficking created an environment where these crimes could operate on an industrial scale. Governors, port authorities, and military commanders, who should have protected innocent civilians instead, became partners in their exploitation, accepting bribes or demanding percentages of profits from human trafficking operations. The seasonal patterns of pirate activity meant that certain times of year became periods of particular terror for merchant shipping and coastal communities. Pirates timed their operations to coincide with favorable weather conditions, trade schedules, and the availability of potential victims, creating predictable cycles of violence that authorities seemed powerless to prevent. The psychological conditioning techniques employed by pirate crews represented perhaps the most insidious aspect of their systematic exploitation of captive women. These methods were designed not merely to control their victims physically, but to fundamentally alter their sense of reality and self-worth. Pirates understood that a broken spirit was far more valuable than a merely subdued body, as psychological destruction made escape attempts less likely and compliance more predictable. The process began with deliberate disorientation tactics that stripped away every familiar reference point from a woman's previous existence. Names were forbidden, with captives referred to only by crude nicknames or simple numbers that reduced their identity to basic inventory management. Personal possessions were either destroyed or distributed among the crew as trophies, eliminating any physical connection to their former lives. Even the clothes they wore were often replaced with rough garments that marked their new status as property rather than people. Sleep deprivation became a weapon of psychological warfare as effective as any blade or pistol. Pirates would deliberately disturb their captives at random intervals throughout the night, preventing the restorative rest that might allow them to maintain psychological resilience. This constant exhaustion created a mental fog that made clear thinking nearly impossible, and resistance seem utterly hopeless. Women found themselves operating in a perpetual state of confusion, where even basic decisions became overwhelming challenges. The manipulation of hope proved to be one of the most cruel psychological tools in the pirate arsenal. Captives would be given brief moments of improved treatment or hints about possible freedom, only to have these small mercies suddenly withdrawn without explanation. This emotional rollercoaster created a desperate dependency on their captors' whims, making women grateful for the smallest kindnesses, even when they came from the very people who had destroyed their lives. Pirates also exploited the natural human tendency to form emotional bonds as a means of control. They would identify which captives had developed relationships with one another and use these connections as leverage. The threat of harm to a fellow captive often proved more effective than direct threats to the individual, as women would endure additional abuse rather than see others suffer on their behalf. This weaponization of empathy turned the very qualities that made them human into tools for their continued subjugation. The rotation system employed by many pirate crews ensured that no captive could develop familiarity or potential influence with any single crew member. Women might be assigned to different pirates on a rotating schedule, preventing the formation of relationships that might lead to protection or preferential treatment. This constant uncertainty about who would control their fate on any given day maintained a state of perpetual anxiety that wore down psychological defenses over time. The public nature of much of the abuse served multiple purposes beyond the immediate gratification of individual pirates. These displays were carefully orchestrated to demonstrate the absolute powerlessness of captives, while simultaneously entertaining the crew and reinforcing their own sense of dominance. The knowledge that their suffering was being observed and enjoyed by others added layers of humiliation that compounded the physical trauma being inflicted. Documentation from recovered pirate vessels reveals the existence of detailed records tracking the behavior and compliance of individual captives. These logbooks contain notes about which women were most likely to attempt escape, who showed signs of organizing resistance among other prisoners, and which victims might be suitable for specific types of exploitation. This bureaucratization of human suffering transformed individual tragedies into data points in a larger criminal enterprise. The seasonal cycles of pirate operations created periods of particular horror for captive women as crews prepared for extended voyages or planned major raids. During these preparation phases, captives might face intensified abuse as pirates worked to establish dominance, before embarking on dangerous missions where discipline would be crucial. The knowledge that their suffering would likely increase during these periods added another layer of dread to an already nightmarish existence. The economic calculations that determined the fate of captive women were conducted with the same cold precision used for any other business transaction. Pirates maintained detailed knowledge of market conditions in various ports, understanding which types of women commanded the highest prices in different locations. Age, appearance, apparent social class, and perceived skills all factored into complex equations that reduced human beings to simple mathematical formulas. The negotiation process for high-value captives often involved extended correspondence between pirate crews and potential buyers, with women serving as unwilling subjects of detailed commercial discussions. These negotiations could drag on for weeks or months, during which captives existed in a state of suspended terror, knowing their fate was being decided by people who viewed them as nothing more than merchandise to be bartered and sold. The transportation networks that moved captive women between different criminal enterprises were extensive and sophisticated, involving not just pirates, but also corrupt merchants, complicit ship captains, and bribed officials throughout the colonial world. These networks created a shadow economy of human trafficking that operated parallel to legitimate trade routes, using the same ports and often the same vessels that carried conventional cargo. The breeding programs established by some pirate communities represented perhaps the most systematically horrific aspect of their exploitation of women. Certain bases maintained capped, for the purpose of producing children, populations, specifically who would be raised as future crew members or sold into slavery. These programs treated human reproduction as a form of livestock management, with women valued solely for their ability to produce offspring that could be exploited or sold. The medical experimentation conducted on captive women by pirate crews lacking proper medical knowledge created additional layers of suffering that served no purpose beyond satisfying crude curiosity. Pirates would attempt primitive surgical procedures, test various poisons and remedies, or simply inflict injuries to observe the healing process. These pseudo-medical activities were conducted without any consideration for pain or long-term consequences to the victims. The religious mockery that often accompanied the abuse of captive women revealed the depth of psychological cruelty that pirates were capable of inflicting. Many crews took particular pleasure in forcing women to participate in blasphemous ceremonies or corrupted religious rituals that violated their deepest spiritual beliefs. This attack on their faith represented an assault on one of the few remaining sources of internal strength that captives might possess. The information networks that tracked escaped captives extended throughout the pirate community and beyond into the broader criminal underworld of the Atlantic world. Women who managed to flee their captors found themselves hunted, not just by their original captors, but by an entire network of criminals who viewed their recapture as both a business opportunity and a matter of professional pride. The seasonal markets that specialized in the sale of captive women operated on predictable schedules that allowed buyers to plan their purchases around specific events or needs. These markets might coincide with the arrival of new colonial governors who needed domestic staff, the establishment of new plantations requiring workers, or simply the seasonal availability of buyers with sufficient capital to make major purchases. The training programs designed to increase the market value of captive women involved forced instruction in various skills that buyers might find valuable. Women were compelled to learn new languages, master domestic tasks, or acquire other abilities that would make them more attractive to potential purchasers. This education was conducted through brutal methods that combined physical punishment with psychological manipulation to ensure rapid compliance. The insurance systems that some pirate crews developed to protect their investment in human cargo revealed the extent to which these criminals had systematized their operations. These informal agreements between different pirate groups provided compensation if captives were lost due to accidents, disease, or successful escape attempts, treating human lives as insurable property, subject to the same risk calculations used for conventional merchandise. The documentation requirements imposed by some buyers created additional layers of exploitation as pirates were forced to provide detailed histories and certifications regarding their human merchandise. These requirements led to the torture of captives to extract information about their backgrounds, families, and previous experiences that could be used to verify their value or authenticate their origins to suspicious purchasers. The quality control measures employed by experienced pirates ensured that their human cargo met the specific requirements of different markets and buyers. These measures involved regular inspections, forced grooming sessions, and even primitive medical examinations designed to identify and address any issues that might reduce the sale price of individual captives before they reached market. The competitive pressures within the pirate community drove increasingly innovative and cruel methods of managing captive women as different crews sought to maximize their profits in an increasingly crowded criminal marketplace. This competition led to the development of new psychological techniques, improved transportation methods, and more efficient systems for processing large numbers of captives simultaneously. The legacy documentation created by pirate crews for their own protection often contained detailed records of their treatment of captive women, creating an extensive paper trail that modern historians have used to reconstruct the full scope of these crimes. These records, preserved in various archives around the world, provide irrefutable evidence of the systematic nature of pirate exploitation and the industrial scale on which these operations were conducted. The evidence we have examined reveals a truth that shatters every romanticized notion of pirate life that popular culture has fed us for generations. What happened to captured women during the golden age of piracy was not an unfortunate byproduct of criminal activity, but a deliberate, systematic, and horrifyingly efficient enterprise of human exploitation that operated on an industrial scale across the Atlantic world. These were not isolated incidents or the actions of a few particularly cruel individuals. This was organized crime at its most sophisticated and depraved, involving networks of criminals, corrupt officials, and complicit merchants who transformed human suffering into profit margins with the same cold calculation used for any other commodity. The psychological conditioning, the economic systems, the transportation networks, and the market structures all reveal an enterprise that had evolved far beyond simple criminality into something approaching a form of institutionalized evil. The women who endured these ordeals faced something that truly was worse than death itself. Death, at least, would have offered an end to suffering. What pirates inflicted was a living hell designed to extract maximum value from human misery, while ensuring that hope itself became another weapon of torture. The systematic destruction of identity, the weaponization of basic human needs, and the complete erasure of legal and social protection created a form of existence that challenged the very definition of what it means to be human. Perhaps most disturbing is how thoroughly this massive criminal enterprise has been erased from popular memory, replaced by sanitized tales of adventure and rebellion that ignore the mountains of evidence documenting these crimes. The court records, survivor testimonies, and archaeological findings all point to the same conclusion. Yet we continue to celebrate pirates as folk heroes, while forgetting the countless women whose stolen lives funded their supposed freedom. The next time you encounter a romanticized portrayal of pirate life, remember Sarah standing on that merchant deck, watching death approach on the horizon. Remember that behind every tale of swashbuckling adventure lies the silent testimony of women whose names we will never know, whose suffering we can barely comprehend, and whose stories deserve to be told without the comfortable filter of mythology and wishful thinking.